Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric, and today I am joined by Earl Fields. Earl, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Eric, for having me and to inviting me into your space and sharing this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to dive into wellness. What does that even mean, right? We talk about it all the time, part of Blue Grit Wellness, like my handle on Instagram, but it can mean so many things. And I really love Earl's story. We've been able to connect, and he's got a TED Talk, which I feel like makes you like pretty legit, man. Like you got a TED Talk. That's a thing.
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah. So, if you could introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll just start talking. We're just going to jump in.
Okay. Yeah. My name is Earl, of course, Fields. I am an executive coach and a public speaker. I am a thought leader developing a new way of thinking through self-care. I travel the world sharing the importance of self-care and bringing it to its consciousness, which is the new idea. I'm from the South, a North Carolina native, but currently I live in Snohomish County with my family, both my wife and daughter. And this conversation of self-care is something that I've been able to kind of develop in my life. I was born to a teenage mother, entrusted to the state, and I was later raised by my grandmother, Ann, who often said, be who you are as loud as you can because you are enough. And I knew every time that I stepped into a room or in a conversation that I was enough to be there or any space. And so, later I became the first generation to graduate from high school, college, and professional school. So I've done a lot of work in self-care, caring for yourself, what makes you happy, what are some things that bring you joy, who are you uninterrupted, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it brings me joy to kind of share this conversation and shed light on the importance of self-care. It's an underutilized strategy for daily life. Many people think of it as a one-size-fit-all approach, but if we be honest with ourselves, self-care look different for us all, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And, we must meet people where they are, right? And so our self-care is a very important practice, with each person building on their own unique and particular self-care approach based on their individual needs. And to be honest, our lives are more aligned when we practice self-care consistently. And the key to self-care is being deliberate.
Folks.
It's being deliberate, right? My conversation centers around being intentional, right? Being intentional with how you think, with your thought patterns, how you show up in the world, having the skills to transition from an emotional state to making executive decisions, right? Things that actually serve you. And so that's the consciousness of it. It's taking a break, slowing down, not being in a hurry to respond, right? Sometimes
That's a tough one today. That's like who's not always at work,
right.
Whether you're public, private sector, we got, as a cop, we have work cell phones, and then that's all my private sector friends and, entrepreneur friends. Like, no, there's no time off.
No,
and that's dangerous. That's dangerous.
it is. I think I speak from a balanced place, right? Yes, we need to have even work life balance, right? We need balance with ourselves. Sometimes we need boundaries, which is also a balance, right? So there are, and I speak to self care from 5 components: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, and social. And
Hmm.
so all of which makes up the totality of who we are, right? And so if we look in all of these areas and find ourselves and become, find our equilibrium with these components, then it serves us. It helps us to show up authentically, right? It helps us to find true balance in what is genuine and authentic. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I love that, man. And I'm gonna rewind a little bit. There's really parts I want to highlight, but where you start your story and you're from, was it North Carolina?
North Carolina,
Yeah. Do
small
you
town.
consider Memphis the South in Carolina?
Yeah, I guess Tennessee is the South.
Yeah,
And
I think
so,
it's like kind of so I was born there, and my family moved when I was like 8, so I call
yeah,
Washington home, but I feel like my memory of it was kind of a contention point whether Tennessee is the South or not. But Memphis being on the southern, southwest corner, I feel like we're
yeah,
kind of right there.
yeah, I guess that would be, um, I would consider it being the South. I
Hmm.
think Tennessee is it kind of all of that borders North Carolina, Virginia, even though, yeah, I would consider that a little bit, you
Yeah.
know.
Okay. Little side note. I was just curious. But
Yeah.
truly, what I do love about how you started this conversation, how you start is the start of your story, and your grandmother telling you just to be you and you're enough, right? Be
Mm-hmm.
you.
Mm-hmm.
Man, but like we talk about self-care and just taking care of ourselves and like being well. Like I think it's worth marinating on that for a moment just to be you and you are enough. Like I think that the reason why I'm literally highlighting that is, do we tell ourselves that? Do we even acknowledge that? And so what a gift of love and support from your grandma. A lot of us don't grow up with that constant recognition where you could quote her, and that's something that, you talk about intention. That's something that my wife and I try to, I was having a conversation with our 4-year-old, and one morning it was just us at, the kitchen counter. And I was like, hey, I love you and I'm proud of you. Do you know that? She's like, yeah. I was like, how do you know that? She's like, you say it a lot and you don't have to keep saying it. And I was like, yeah, I do say it a lot. I'm going to keep saying it. And, it might be beyond her. I think that it's something that she'll probably smirk and laugh about. It might become like a thing in years, but no, I want to be intentional because life moves fast, right? To the point of work life balance. Like, if you don't set time aside and set attention aside, I frequently have to couple like attention and intention because we need both. Yeah, it's going to pass us by.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with that. Being who you are. I look at if you're not who you are, then you're a counterfeiter,
Hmm.
right? I think everybody is designed to show up in this world, in whatever space you're in, and that you're there to offer something, right? You have to discover what that is. But I am of the thought that when we do show up as ourselves, as who we are, because oftentimes we spend more of our present moment trying to not make the mistakes tomorrow that we made yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're so busy trying to make up for what we lost or what didn't go right, to where we're forsaking our very present moment. And that gets the present moment to me get lost and in between that, which it is, but it gets lost because we're not consciously thinking about ourselves and what brings us joy and what makes us happy. We're constantly trying to compete. Because listen, when we, as a child, we are absorbing, excuse me, all of um, the examples that we have before us, what we experience. that makes up our journey, right? And so one of the things that I um, would like to highlight with being who you are is that I share with my daughter that same conversation, that, you know, it truly benefits you to show up authentically, because in whatever space that you're in, there is something that you have to offer that space or that conversation or or that relationship, right? A lot of times we're just living our lives going to and fro, expecting um, we are not being intentional about living, not being intentional about making a difference, not being intentional about who we are. And so, because it's a personal practice, it's our own unique approach, it's our own, and we have to sit with ourselves. I've been finding a way to often kind of sit with myself and say, what brings you happy? What makes you happy? What
Mm,
motivates you? What serves you? How can I retain the energy, the love, the motivation that I have? And how can I also give that back to those persons within my reach? Because as you show up as enough, right? As you show up as yourself, you are benefiting others others around you, others who are within your reach. I say that because we must learn self care to be present for ourselves. That way, we will be truly available,
yeah.
right,
Hmm.
with other for other people who really need us. I with my daughter, one of the game changing moments for me is when she said to me I was grumpy.
Mm,
And that's because I was so caught up in um, the external elements versus focusing on things that matter to me. I'll give you an example. My wife used to say, "Go on out there and save the world. I'll be here when you get back." And
that's so good.
I was forsaking, some of our moments where we could be sharing and and when I come home, I'm exhausted, right?
Yeah.
I have to muster up energy to play with my little one when she was little, right? Because I was, not having enough in my reservoir when I needed, or when those who around me who needed me the most. And so I began to consciously think, hey, it's time for you to serve yourself in the things that matter to you and not be distracted by people, places, and things, right? So my thoughts when it comes to being enough and serving yourself and those around you, and how you have the ability to show up as you when you make that decision to be intentional.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's such a good focal point, like what brings you joy. And let's not distract, where it could bleed, like what makes you happy in the moment, or what is pleasurable could be different than what brings you fulfillment. And my
Mm-hmm.
example is I'm someone that is not good or great at being with my thoughts or being in the moment, right? I am
Mm-hmm.
constantly in that yesterday or tomorrow. I'm more of a tomorrow, right? So that's anxiety technically, right? When you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about planning and over uh preparing for all these different contingencies, whether it's day work, what have you. With that, I tend to be really busy, so I'm not left with my thoughts. And so driving home after a long day of work, right, I might be consuming a podcast, right? Because I'm going to learn and I'm going to make the most of this like awful commute and make this commute productive. But to your
Mm-hmm.
point, you get home so zapped, and I want to highlight something that a prior boss highlighted for me, which was I was picking his brain, and he's been a great mentor, but he's got 3 kids, and they all have very different needs, very different energy levels, very different. They're
Mm-hmm.
very different, like wonderful people and humans. I have one kid, and I'm like, how do you do it? Like, and he
Right.
has this kind of like zen about him, but he's like, kind of shut down what's in the car on the way home. And on the drive, I think about what energy each of my kids and my wife need. Like, what do they need from me? So when I step out of the car, I'm like, okay, this kid needs this, my boy needs that, and then so I'm like, man, that is extreme intention, and it
Mm-hmm.
it takes it takes him feeding, himself and his family through that, right? It might be,
Mm-hmm.
that hybrid between self-care and, care for your family, but in the moment, right? If you're me in that situation, I'm like, well, I want to listen to this podcast, or actually I just kind of want to listen to whatever. But maybe if it was listening to music and zenning out, that would feed me to be more available. So that's kind of my application of what you said, which I think is so well put.
I also would like to, I had to elevate my quality of life. And that was kind of I realized I had to raise my self-worth, right?
Mm,
This journey required kind of shedding aspects that made me feel inadequate, right? Or that it was a process kind of laden with challenges and discomfort and even fear. Even with raising a daughter, I'm from the South, right? And as a man, I also want to protect her, right? Keep her from. So I was starting to kind of raise my daughter with um with hopes that, how, I'll put it like this, how we tend to raise our children based on either how we were raised or how
mm-hmm.
we um were not raised, right?
Yeah.
Either way, right?
Yeah.
And we tend to um realize that although we may have some of the foundation of our upbringing, but there are some changes or some adjustments that we need to make with the times, right? So there was some insecurities that I had with raising my child, or there was some insecurities that because of some trauma that I faced, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I was trying to protect her and don't want her
Yeah.
to do this, and you can't do that, or you know, treating her so fragile, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I had to take a step back and realize that she has to grow into her own self.
Yeah.
And I am there to support or guide her through this life, not dictate who she should become or my goal is that she become a competent adult, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, but that I instill within her self-worth, right? And also kind of dismantle these barriers that, not only that I have or that I even may have projected onto her. And so
Yeah.
there is a consciousness that needs to take place in every relationship that we have with people, right? Um, when it comes to you know, our relationships, our work relationships, our, organizations, community, family, any relationship that we have, we need to be conscious of those relationships and how we can, gradually grow as we begin to grow with our self-worth, right? When we begin to raise our self-worth, everything around us becomes worthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it creates balance for us to then not only um because I believe that our self-worth dictates our limits with people, with our personal achievements, with our um with every aspect of who we are. I believe that every facet of our lives meets us at the level of our self-worth. So I want to highlight that's our self-worth. It does dictate, our relationships with people, our experiences, how we view some of the experiences that we have, um, and then be good to yourself,
Mm.
right? Be kind to yourself. Say to yourself, you know, again, when we're focused on tomorrow, right? Not focused on today, on the now. We should I'm challenging my executive leaders that, I help coach. This is what I say to them. Can we stop for a moment to celebrate how far we've come? Right? We never give that any honor, right? We never give that any love. I think it's important that we appreciate how far we've come, and I also think that in doing that, that will give us some value of where we are now that will then build on where we're going versus skipping over steps and
Yeah.
you know but this is a conversation I think that is endless, right?
Hmm.
Every the challenge I'm having now, and I wouldn't call it a challenge, it's a good challenge, right? You want those
Opportunity,
good
right?
challenges, right? It's opportunities, right? That everyone is seeking that is seeking self-care. Now my conversation may be a little different. This I my friends tend to say that I have the conversation that they're having in their head.
That's a
And
good
never
thing. You can put you're putting words to, what is otherwise like a swirl of competing thoughts, right? Like that's
yeah,
kind of the point. Yeah.
yeah. And when I think about self care, I have my own community, my own family age group. I've been having this conversation for a long time. So this is, like I said, an endless conversation. But when I think about avenues, I am in my community of influence has been children and seniors, right? I want the children to know that self care matters in
Hmm.
our daily, in our conscious thinking, in our daily activity, and that there are ways that we can support, that we can um, appreciate self care, or that we can exercise it. We can exercise it in our attitude, um, in in our actions, and what we say, and how we respond. But I teach that um, through the lens through the lenses of public speaking. It's called I Speak Lab. So I have that avenue. Then I have a senior group that I support, right, through a weekly call, and just to see if you need anything,
Mm.
conversations. Sometimes we on the phone, you know, talking about old times and things that they remember, and they're applying wisdom into me. But I'm also having this conversation, as I stated, with executive leaders who who are trying to find balance in both their personal and professional lives. But if I believe that if we focus on our personal lives, right, what feeds us, what fills our own cup, that it would then trickle off into other areas of our lives that are important to us, and it will begin to see value. But even with that, there's a conversation that the executive leaders are saying now, hey, how can we bring this conversation into our organization,
Hmm.
right? How can we make this a resource for um, the people we serve, or the people who um, we have within our reach. And my conversation is that we bring that into the new hire packet, right? In the onset of the employment, rather than
Hmm.
waiting to the retention process. When people are actually, once they get to the retention process, they're done pretty much. It's hard trying to turn that person around. But if employees or the communities that we support know that self-care matters to us personally and to the organization, and to people we lead, then that will foster a self-care culture
Hmm.
where people are actually showing up because they desire to show up, not just because it's another paycheck,
Yeah,
right?
they have to. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we have, I look at, because come on, most of us spend at minimum 12 hours on doing work, at minimum, because we're not sleeping that much anymore.
Yeah, yeah. No, there's so much there I wanna unpack, and
Okay.
yeah,
Oh,
so
sorry.
especially for no, you're good. There's a lot of the audience that's first responders and police, and so I just kind of want to rewind, and a couple things you said bring some thoughts to light, which is that hey, we're talking about self worth, and you got to start there, right? So we talked about that a bit, but for myself, and I know there's a lot of first responders and cops that come from a place of wanting to serve because of something that they didn't have or something that they experienced, some trauma
Hmm.
or some trauma that was in their lives, right? And so that notion of self-worth, and it bleeds into confidence and how you show up, like that's a very relevant conversation, and knowing yourself and your identity. And I have so much interaction with new hires and people that want to come into this job, especially when it came out of recruiting, and so many people want to know what it takes to be a cop. Like, what do I need to improve on? And I'm like, if you're already at the stage, there's a lot of skills that will help, but ultimately, you got to be your best self. And so that's a good reminder, right? People need to be adaptable, but they have to remember their heart for service and their purpose. Beyond that, they got to be themselves, because when I was a new officer, and I see it a lot, right? And some people don't really break out of this, but they're trying to put on this aura or this persona of someone else, and it doesn't work well, right? It People either see through it, or it creates this barrier where you're unable to connect and empathize. And so not to deviate too much, but just for the brass tacks of the job of first responder work, like, we shouldn't suppress or deny that. And so, to Earl's point, like, that is something that we need to focus on and be attentive to, so we can support and nurture that.
Absolutely. I think that when we find purpose in what we do, excuse me, in who we are, it becomes what we do,
Mm,
right? And so finding purpose in who you are will show up everywhere. It shows up in your family. It shows up in your career. It shows up at the grocery store, right? It shows up everywhere you are. And so I challenge you to accept, because listen, when we think accept yourself, when we think about the totality of who we are, our character matters, right? Our personality makes up who we are, right? Our laughter, all of these aspects, our integrity, all of those things make up who we are. And so um, we shouldn't skip over those things. We shouldn't skip over our personality. The reason why we have this personality is because we are meant to use it. And how do we use um, these skills or these characteristics of who we are, right? Unapologetically. That's what makes up your true self,
hmm
and I like to share with some of the students that I work with. I say to them, imagine for a moment a life where nothing stands in your way, where you can shine unapologetically as your true self. Envision a world where the obstacles that have held you back dissolve into insignificance, right? That's where we want to be. That's the transformative power of self-care, is allowing these obstacles, right? These barriers that whomever has built around them, right? Either you did it or someone did it to you, because sometimes our experiences builds this exterior, right? If we've ever been hurt before, we don't want to be hurt again. So
hmm
we build up these walls. And so sometimes it's good to have boundaries, but also sometimes it's good to challenge yourself to do something that you haven't done before, right? Which could unveil, other parts of you that you didn't know. And so I challenge you to sit with yourself. Ask yourself. It's okay to ask yourself what makes you happy, what brings you joy, what fills your cup, what is my purpose? what am I here to do? Right? Ever since I was a kid, and I've heard this all of my life, you have a lot of joy. Here come joy.
Hmm.
And I've owned that. I believe in every environment that I go into, there's joy, there's laughter, there's moments where we can share positivity. I like to call myself the light, right? I'm also a change agent. And so in these first responders, um, in these, we have to own whether or not this is what we want to do, because I know it's a tough position, right? To always be always availing yourself to the community, to the people you serve. I'm sure even when they're not at work, they're at work, right?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Right? And good, listen, good Samaritans, but
Hmm.
but I think that in finding yourself, we should learn to appreciate who we are, who we've become, that will ultimately carry us where we're going. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, with that, that is such a piece, and it's something that we talk about pretty frequently or regularly on this podcast, which is work-life balance and trying to achieve that, right? There's this hypervigilance and uh this inability at times to toggle that dimmer switch or turn work off, right? Because, you know, being a dad, you're a protector, and then that's your job, is to protect the community. Then that heightens into, so many aspects of your life. And so it is a necessary conversation when we talk about how we have to care for ourselves in order to care for others, and ultimately before, right? And it's actually in contradiction to a tenet we train in police, which we call the priorities of life, right? So we put the victim first, and then we put bystanders, and then we put ourselves, and then the suspect at the bottom, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
if we don't put ourselves decently low, then we won't go, right? That's dangerous. We don't go.
Yeah.
So like, there was some old school of like, hey, you always go home, but it's like, well, you got to put yourself into some bad spots to save some people sometimes, and like, we accept that. But it is a challenge, right? Even in the wellness space of first responders and the circles I'm fortunate to be a part of, but we do see frequently these folks that are so devoted to taking care of others that their own self-care is neglected, to say the least. And so, yeah, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that when we talk about culture, because, yeah, we can implement these programs, we can implement these discussions, but I love what you're saying as far as like culture change, and it is complicated. It takes time and intention. But yeah, what are your thoughts on all that?
Well, it is. We that is almost like a pandemic itself, right? And people not, when you hear about giving of yourself, and we do, first responders, we do so much for other people, even those who aren't first responders. If we have a tendency of pouring into others, or doing unto others, or treating your neighbor right first, and showing, giving first, when, because we have built this posture of giving and of service, we have a tendency of not having the ability, not so much the ability, but wanting to give, right? I think we we give of ourselves so much to where we neglect ourselves. And so now this is me turning you back to yourself. This is the conversation where we say, hey, I know that you have a tendency of loving other people, and that's good. We have a tendency of caring for other people, or this is my line of work. And, we get so in that pattern, to where we don't show up for ourselves, and we find ourselves burn out. We find ourselves drained. We find ourselves burdened. We find ourselves wounded because we're not living a self-focused life, right? We need to embrace that opportunity of self-focused living. Pursuing what makes you happy, pursuing what ignites you, what propels you out of the bed each morning and empowers you to be your authentic self. And so that is the challenge. When I say pandemic, it's a challenge for so many people,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the first that oftentimes it's so drilled into our psyche and our culture and our experience that we give, and then we don't have enough in our reservoir, right? And then we show up irritable, or I learned this in therapy. It was called dysthymia, an unpleasant mood. And oftentimes we find ourselves in this mood because we aren't taking care of ourselves. We aren't filling our own cup. We aren't
Mm-hmm.
doing things that we desire, right? We always showing up for other people and doing things for other people, which hinders the process, right, of us taking care of ourselves. It builds up um, this this thought that I'm always supposed to care for other people, and I'm okay with that, right? I am a person who's always done that. I've always cared for other people. I'm always looking out for my family. I'm the eldest of my mom's children, and since I was a kid, I found myself trying to save them or be an example, not trying to make a mistake because I want to make sure that I'm setting the example for them, that they'll follow in my footsteps, that they'll do good, right? And then, I've found myself through life trying to save the world. And I find myself wondering, what about me? But it's only until I'm burnt out. It's only when I become frustrated, when they become overwhelmed. And we don't want to push ourselves to that point. That's why it's okay to take moments, right? We're looking for these big aha moments, these moments that are planned, right? Like a spa day, or a day at the gym, which is all good. But what about those moments where you just sit with whatever your um, taste of beverage is, coffee or glass of water, and just sitting with yourself, with your own thoughts,
Mm.
not cutting away the distractions of people, places, things, the internet, TV, just shutting off the noise where you can actually hear yourself speak to yourself, and how you can understand, because we have to get into the feeling, right? We need to feel these experiences, which is a whole nother conversation. But we
Yeah,
need
we
to
could go
begin
there.
to
Yeah.
feel these experiences. What really makes you happy? I'm not talking about a good meal. Yeah, that's happy for the moment, but what do we do to for this to be an ongoing process, right? Even
Yeah.
if it's volunteering, or you know, getting into some crafts or whatever hobbies you like, finding some moment that where you can have you some me time, that you can separate the work from you, and you can separate your family from you just for a moment. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
neglect those things, but take the necessary time that you need to build yourself, to support yourself, to feel these moments, to ignite yourself, to empower yourself. I think we don't do that enough.
Yeah.
And we expect to show up differently, and we're going to continue to show up the same unless we do something different, right? Unless we
Yeah.
stay on that pursuit of happiness, or that pursuit of joy, that pursuit of love. So,
Yeah. No, there's so much you said that I think is hitting right on, and it's that when you're describing some of this practice, I think of mindfulness, right? Just to
Mm-hmm.
be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think of connection. And some
Mm-hmm.
people, they hear mindfulness and then they think meditation and think woo woo. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
a heavy practitioner of meditation, but I have a lot of opportunity to grow there. But just to be mindful and just, you highlighted it right there, right? Distraction. Because again, I think that goes back to like how I'm trying to process what you're putting out, which is, hey, don't get distracted with pleasure, which could be
Mm-hmm.
fleeting, but what fulfills you, what nourishes you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it the scrolling, which is like the doom scrolling of where it just is a time bandit and you are often stimulated but not satisfied? Is it the food, which I've heard called temporary mouth pleasure, and I love to eat, so that is a
Yeah, me
helpful
too.
yeah, it is a helpful thing to put on, right? Because hey, with balance and moderation, right? But I'm not the best moderator, so when people see what I eat, oftentimes it is pretty rigid, but it's because I have to balance the other way, and um, yeah, I'm not someone that's just gonna have like a few bites of ice cream and like call it good, right? So, but
Right.
yeah, the temporary mouth pleasure, right? Is that really fulfilling? And maybe it is, right? Maybe it is. But if it's stress eating, which I've been known to do, or it's boredom eating, which I've been known to do, then we're getting outside of that, right? We're getting outside of the intent and then the benefit and the result of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that we put a lot more emphasis on when we talk about physical self-care and these self-cares, right? We're putting more emphasis on how much time is it going to take, or is it going to interrupt my own schedule? And we put in too much time into that. When my conversation around physical self-care is any activity that you do on purpose to improve your physical health, it's physical self-care, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just being conscious about it, right? We we burn out because we want to do 2 hours in the gym when we see people who can do 2 hours in the gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
Versus taking our 15 minutes,
Yeah.
right? Do what works for us. I think that if we stop focusing, turn the attention back to us, right? Back to what we need, what drives us. If we do that, I think that and then I think it's commendable that you start focusing on you. It doesn't. People has this conversation about it being selfish,
Mm.
or that you're not kind when you aren't thinking of others. But hey, I need a moment,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay. I've had my daughter. Now I come from um, a generation possibly that children were seen and not heard, right?
Yeah. I know that.
um,
Yeah.
right. And so with my daughter, it was kind of, I was taken aback when she asked me for a moment, because in my mind, it was more of, I'm the daddy. You don't need a break, right? What do you need a break from? You know,
Yeah.
where, where I took, I looked through a different lens. I looked through the lens that she is a person. She is a being.
Mm-hmm.
She has feelings, right? She has boundaries. She need a break, and I should respect that. And so sometimes we need to be honest, even with the people around us, that
Yeah.
we need a break. Although we love those people because what they support us, they love us, they help empower us. I talk about that with social self-care. You still have to remember that you matter in this equation of life.
Yeah.
And that if you can't keep showing up, um, you know, half of you showing up, partial of you showing up, because areas of your life you burn out in some of these areas, and you need to be replenished, right? You need to feed yourself with the necessary tools that will build you up, and surround yourself with those people who speak that same language. You know, in order for you to create a self-care culture, you need to first become a part of the culture.
Yeah, it's modeling, right? And that's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
something you said way earlier on, towards the beginning, you said you got to meet people where they are. And I think that's
Hmm.
such a tenet of leadership, right? If leadership isn't just directing, it's seeing if people follow, not just because they have to, but they follow along because they want to. And,
Hmm.
I think that's such a powerful theme for self-care. If you model it, that's the best way to demonstrate how we can all do it. Um, one of your things being about self-worth, and like I venture to guess that for most people, when they make that commitment and they recognize and they make that mental shift to say, "You're right, Earl, I gotta take care of me before I can take care of others adequately, like so I don't burn out." But what do you say to those that maybe they recognize it and they just have so much struggle because they are parents, they are working parents, maybe they're single parents, right? We see that very often. Um, what generally can help people kind of flip that switch a little bit?
Courage, being intentional about it. The only thing stands in your way is fear. Sometimes we talk about time, managing that. We don't need um, we need to take time daily, right? It's a constant. It has to be a constant practice. It has to become a part of who you are. You can't just lay self-care on the shelf and decide you're going to pick it up. It's not going to have this, it's not going to feed you the same way, right? Because we're forever evolving into who we are to become, right? Um, when I look at, there's some things I didn't like before that I may like now. Some things that um, I liked before that I may not like now. And so we have to um, make a decision, and that's the conscious piece. Become aware. So let me say this: become aware, and that's through the acknowledgement that self care matters, and that is important. And then there needs to be um, an application piece, right? How do I apply this to my life, and what is it that serves me? Right? How can I be, how can I show up for myself today? And that's daily. The reason why we find ourselves not being consistent in it is because we're not consciously thinking about it. And how to switch that is to give yourself a reminder, right? Even in moments, I have um, this practice that I do. Um, Throughout the day, I take breaths, you know, I breathe in and I breathe out, right? I do that about 5 times, but I consciously put in place, I have this consciously in my mind that I'm moving from what was to what is, and I'm moving to what serves me now. And so I get that we're busy. I get that we're consumed. But the reality is that we have to find ways and time to commit to what makes us healthy, right? Commit to our mental capacity and to our physical self-care and to our emotions. I'm learning how to go to transition sometimes from my emotional state to my more executive state where I can make decisions happen. But I will say that consciousness is it. Yes, we know we can do it, right? We know that it exists, but the application piece, taking the necessary time out of whatever schedule you have to be, thoughtful of yourself, right? To be mindful of what, again, I talk about what makes you happy because we're living in a world where there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of conversations that the world is having that is negative. And so if we can steal away from that, because of course, if we can spend 25 minutes lost in social media, because we can go down a rabbit hole on some of those things, if we can do that, surely we can take time, at least a couple of moments throughout the day to write, to think, to breathe, to show kindness to someone or to show kindness to ourselves. We think that it has to take a lot of money and that it's expensive, and when even our time is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But come on. And I would challenge people to do their very best. And I don't want to in my conversation, I don't want to sound like that I am um I want to sound like I'm holding you accountable. That's how I want to sound.
Yeah.
I want to be holding myself accountable for my needs, but I'm also holding you accountable for loving you, for giving yourself grace. So showing yourself forgiveness, breaking patterns, all of these things these barriers that have built up that we've built up or that have been built up in our lives to keep us from showing up. And so that, I understand that we talk about time, but the more we tell ourselves that we don't have time, we're not going to find time.
Mm-hmm.
The more we tell ourselves that we can't make it, we're not going to make it. We
Yeah,
need to
that's a
change
limiting belief, right?
yes, we
Like,
need to
it's the
change the
constraints.
language.
Yeah.
Yes, changing
Yeah.
the language and the mindset. That's the piece, is the consciousness is changing the mindset of what was. You can no longer think of yourself this way,
Mm-hmm.
right? You need to
Yeah.
think of yourself this way, because as you thinketh, you become,
Yeah.
you know?
It's such a thing, and it's we tell ourselves these things, and I'll give a couple examples, and hopefully it's just to help illustrate it, right? So, for me, I'm active on social media. I part of it is this project that I continue to build, and I get a lot of engagement, right? People send me messages, they have questions, and it's very fulfilling. And while that is an intentional time, it takes a lot of time to create the content. It takes a lot of
Mm-hmm.
time to edit and then track it. And then but then that bleeds into checking on it, right? And checking to
Mm-hmm.
see if someone commented. And then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes another thing. And then it becomes consuming, right? And then scrolling. And so I get it, right? A lot of us, if you're listening to what Earl's saying, you're like, man, that's such discipline. But you got to start somewhere. And I love how you highlighted it can be a couple minutes. Literally, if you're stuck inside at a desk and you have a cubicle and you don't have a window, like, take a break when you get up to use the restroom. Hopefully you're hydrating and that's good, and so you need to go to the restroom a couple times. Go on a walk down the stairs of your office building, go get a breath of fresh air, even if it's wet and cold outside. That's nourishing to you, right? That just took a moment. It's good for you. You're probably going to be more productive because you did it. Similarly, I work at a desk a lot now. It's not something I'm super proud of. It's just part of the job, but I make sure to take some time when everything kind of starts bleeding together on the screen. I'm like, I got to get up. Like, I can go down the hall. I can go to the pull-up bar and do a couple sets of pull-ups, right? Sometimes I'm only in there for 4 or 5 minutes, and then I come back out and I get back to work. But those little injections, right? Doing some
Mm-hmm.
push-ups when you're waiting for your coffee to brew, right? Just listening and smelling that coffee as I'm doing my push-ups, and I'm getting excited for it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it might sound cheesy, but these are little ways that I've been able to get a little bit better about mindfulness. Um, I'll share this. A lot of times I get up way earlier than the family, and I can start writing or working on a post. But again, that could bleed into, the scrolling, the doom scrolling. So I downloaded a chess app, and so I can I can play chess and I can practice something that I'm not good at in hopes that I get better, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you asked me a month ago, hey, like, what do you think about taking some online chess and just working on a little app and improving that, I'd be like, you're out of your mind. Like, I don't have time for a new hobby. But no, we make excuses and we get comfortable in our routine. But to your point earlier too, right? It's something I frequently like to highlight is let's get uncomfortable because that's where we grow.
Hmm. Um, who are you uninterrupted? I think that's a better question.
Hmm.
It's who are you with no noise? If you had no responsibilities of anyone else other than yourself, what does that look like?
Hmm.
When you don't have to pick up your children, when you don't have to, if you had none of those things, those, you know, excuses, as you would say, but they they're real life situations. That's the reality of what we go through to,
Yeah.
in this life. But who are you if that didn't exist?
Yeah, I will
And
answer that because I think it would be helpful for a lot of people that need this discussion, right? A lot of people that are listening in, they're like, man, where do I start? But oftentimes when I actually do not have the obligations, right? If my wife is with friends or, my kids at grandma's, a lot of times, and I've told my wife this, like, I just kind of start working, right? I work on work or I work on this podcast stuff, right? And so it is an indicator that for some of us that are doers, we're busy, like we're not appropriately taking time to focus on us, right? We're not really asking ourselves, hey, what do you want slash need in this moment to be in your best space? Like really pay into yourself because I want to
Mhm.
be productive, right? I want to make the most of this time. And it is a balance because I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to pursue these projects and something that feeds you. This project certainly does. However, to your point, I think it's a really meaningful uh conversation and thing to think about.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, because I am all things self-care, right? I work my my life has been centered around my career. And for me, this is my life's work. And for those who are listening, when this is your life's work, it's hard to turn it off
Mm-hmm.
because it comes up in everything that you do, right? And so because self-care is my platform, social media, you name it, I'm touring out in the world, sharing the thoughts of self-care. And so, and honestly, people are paying me to be me, right?
Yeah.
which is a powerful and most wonderful place to be. But in all that, I too have to take a step back and be conscious of what I need. Be conscious of what makes me happy, what brings me joy, what um also what triggers me, right?
Mm-hmm. Two
Right?
sides of the coin, right?
Come on. So we have um we those of us who feel like that this is our life's work, what we do is our life's work and we can't turn it off, we have to find some way to do that. And when we do that, we realize that we can show up better, right? We can um, be more useful when we are feeding ourselves, when we are well, right? When we are constantly um, paying attention to what serves us. And so it's easy to allow those your person when you're doing something you love it has become your profession. Sometimes it collides, right? And we can't seem to get out of step away from it because it and especially if you own your own business, right? You're talking
Mm-hmm.
about you're dealing with people and payroll and social media and content. I mean, it's just all of the things. And so I am elevating myself to a more conscious experience, to a more self-focused living. And I think I encourage everyone who's listening that it's important that you show up for you now. It's important that you say yes to yourself, that you fill yourself with the love you need, right? With the joy you need. I realize that people become the reality of the things we need, right? If we need joy, what happens? All of a sudden, somebody makes us laugh, you know. So be also conscious of the resources that you have in front of you, right? I'm in Snohomish County, so I came from North Carolina, so I don't have much family to like watch my daughter for a night,
Mhm.
right? But we find ways um we find ways to um, be with each other, my wife and I. We find ways for us, the three of us, right? So we are consumed with life. Life is going to bring us what it's going to bring us. But I think that if we are equipped with the tools of self-care, right? What we need, and everybody may look different, you know? It's not like I said, this is not me having the conversation only, right? I've extended this conversation to everyone because I know that I'm not the only person that can take part in self-care. I can speak from what my experience and my knowledge and my information and the research. Um, but experience is a great teacher, right? So
Absolutely.
it's through your experience that you find what you need and how to serve others, right? Your experience will speak. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely, Earl. Well, really appreciate the time and the conversation, the journey you took us on, and how people can reflect and build in these skills. Such a necessary thing, and hopefully, like 98%. Let's just make it 100. Hopefully, everyone after this, when they hit the pause button, or they turn off their podcast, or they get to where they're going, they take just a moment and just be right in the
just
space, in the
be.
moment, because we need such reminders on that. But Earl, greatly appreciated if you could please share where people can find you, what you're working on, how they can get in contact with you.
Again, Earl Fields. I am on all platforms as Earl Fields. LinkedIn as Earl Fields, but on all other social media platforms, I am Earl Fields Official. And you can find me there. I am out here doing a lot of work. You may even find me on the city streets doing
Mm,
interviews because I there's a lot of work that I'm doing. I'm also in the community where I have an I Speak lab that I am doing with Goodwill, right? With their
nice.
youth. It's called Youth on Track, where I teach a public speaking program. It's a one that I developed, and its success is built in the model, and so it highlights their experience through self-care, right? So they speak their own voice and they become advocates for themselves, and then they also develop what they need, what they want, what they desire. So I am out here. I'm also an executive coach. I am out here coaching leaders in being their authentic selves and how to merge their personal with their professional, because they aren't, who you are personally will show up professionally.
Mm-hmm.
So if we work those things out, unpack those things, and become who we are, and sometimes we realize when we unpack them, they belong discarded versus holding on to them. But that's a whole nother conversation too.
Mm,
But meet me. I am in this Seattle area, but I also travel all over the world, sharing this conversation of self care. I am creating a self care culture everywhere. So show me some love if you see me.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Find Earl, check out the show notes, and until next time. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.